In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this image with a smoke bomb just like this, and then I'm going to take you through the Photoshop document and show you how I edited it. Hey there everyone, my name is Mundy. I'm a photographer and digital artist from Montreal, Quebec, and today I wanted to show you how I made this image. To start, this image is called Barriers 6, and it's a part of a series I've been working on for about a year and a half, 2 years now, called Barriers, and there's a link in the description if you want to check out the other images in that series. So after I came up with this idea, I knew that I would need to shoot this either indoors or somewhere outdoors but sheltered to make sure that there wouldn't be any wind messing with the photo shoot. Obviously with using smoke, you don't want the wind to be blowing the smoke around. I really wanted just the smoke to be billowing up, kind of covering the face of the figure and only really see their hands holding the book. So after trying to find a spot like this for a long time, I eventually conceded and just ended up using my back balcony, which is ironic because it was literally next to me the entire time. I basically used tarps to make a makeshift studio space where I built walls with the tarps to not let the smoke out, but also I left a little bit of a crevice at the top so the smoke could actually not like build up inside of the studio space that I'd made in my back balcony, and so that it could escape basically, so it wouldn't fill the room after each time we'd use a smoke bomb. As far as the shoot went, it was actually pretty straightforward and simple other than shooting in a very narrow space. The shot was lit with just one light, an Alien B softbox, a very basic softbox. There's a link in the description if you want to check those out. You're just getting started out with flash photography, I highly recommend them. The color accuracy is not perfect. You will notice a slight difference from shot to shot between like a very slight greenish tint to a slight purplish tint. But if you're only shooting still images and you're calibrating your monitor and you're using a gray card, it's really not a big deal and they're affordable, so I recommend them. The way I actually got the smoke bombs to stay in the book was I just taped them down, and we tried about two different ways. So we tried once where the smoke bomb would be pointing upwards and then another way where it would be pointing downwards, and it actually ended up working out when it was pointing downwards, ironically. I realized after filming that I didn't actually show the smoke bomb that I used, so there will be a link in the description as well if you want to see where I got mine. And shout out to my friend Jamie for doing this. He basically had a bunch of smoke like billowing in his face like 4 or 5 times. We wrapped a bandana around his head to kind of stop the smoke from going into his mouth and things like this, but shout out to him for doing that. I got a link in the description to check out his photos as well. Alright, so that's how the shoot went down. Now I want to take you into Photoshop and show you how the image was edited. Alright guys, so we're here in Photoshop now, and as you can see, this is the final image. I'm just going to show you the actual base image that we started with before adding a bunch of layers on top. So this is the completely untouched, unedited image. I'm just going to turn off this layer mask, and as you can see, it's a lot more unruly than the final image. The final image is pretty clean, but this image, the smoke is kind of billowing all over the place, and you can actually see the background here that I tried to cover up with this white sheet, but I think at this point we had done several takes, and the wind and the smoke itself probably messed with the background a bit, but thankfully Photoshop was able to clean that up, or I was able to with Photoshop rather. And so I'm just going to show you how this edit went down. So I've used this layer mask here, which I made after doing all my edits, but I just did that to clean up basically all the edges here. So you can see that it's actually cutting out the figure. And I knew that I wanted this to be on white, so I actually have a white layer right here. And as you can see, got some nice white now, so it's already a huge improvement, and all I've actually done is made a very simple mask here to mask out the tops, and there is some stuff poking out around the edges, but we're going to deal with that in a second. So this is the raw edit. So as you can see, the color in the smoke is a bit gone. Before it's a bit kind of blue. There's some blues in there. It's definitely not a black, it's more of a gray. And I kind of knew going into this shoot using the smoke bombs that it was going to be like a super dark black and that I would probably have to do some work in Photoshop, but I opted for the gray instead of a blue or something just because I figured there'd be less work to do in Photoshop. And so all of these images here, or all of these files rather, are different photos from the same shoot, and they're all raw files. The way I work typically is that instead of rendering out my images as JPEGs when I'm doing my raw processing, I'll actually make them smart objects in Adobe Camera Raw, and I'll show you how to do that very quickly. So when you're loading, I'm just waiting for this to load. So when you have an image, you can actually see his legs. The image is a lot taller actually, but when you have an image loaded up in Adobe Camera Raw, you have this little dialog box down here, and you can click it, and if you click open in Photoshop as smart objects, it becomes a editable file basically. And this, instead of using a JPEG, which is a flat image that you, once it's in the document, you can edit it of course with adjustment layers and going up here to image adjustments and all that, but by keeping it a raw file, you're basically having the power of being able to like increase the exposure and bring up like highlights and things like that, or shadows rather, noise canceling and things like this, sharpening, all that. So I've always worked this way. I think it's honestly the best way to work. It makes for a large Photoshop document, and so this one, the bottom left here, it says it's 6.9 0.06 gigs. I'm not sure if that's the actual working size or the final size. Either way, it makes for a large file. And these are all 40 megapixel images, so it gets a bit intense, so you better have a good computer. So all of these layers here are basically just building up the image over and over with different little adjustments. So for example, right here is a pretty huge change going on. I'm subbing out the bottom of the shirt. So this is another base image, but one that we didn't use, and this is my buddy Jamie. He took like 4 smoke bombs to the face for this. Hats off to him. I will put links in the description for his work and his Instagram stuff. You should check his stuff out. He's pretty good. But so there was an image where there was no smoke going down, and so I just took that and I basically composited it in. So you can see that actually lines up perfectly with the other one, or I made it line up rather, because of the layer mask. And so that worked out perfectly because I didn't really want it to billow out there. I wanted it to look like it was just going upwards like this. And so similarly, the other images are all just kind of adding on. I'm not sure what this one's doing actually. Oh, okay, I guess it's just a very fine. That's a bit brighter, I think. Can't really tell. Yeah, it's a bit brighter. A bit more detail on the blacks. Here I'm covering up the corners. And these are all very simple, like simple techniques. Like literally, this is just layer masks. So I'm just taking images from the shoot. Just trying to get this kind of thing in one image, trying to get like a perfect shot is very unlikely, and sometimes it does happen. And obviously, if that were the case, I would love it. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I'm a bit of a control freak, so I like having options, and that's why I kind of just spray and pray when I'm doing these kinds of shoots, and that way I can build the image and combine different images together and mask them using like soft brushes or hard brushes depending on where it is in the image. And as you can see, just by kind of combining different images together, we've already taken this from a pretty unruly image to one that's a lot more tame. And obviously this is still quite light, but as we go along, you'll see. Clean up book and shirt. So right here, I'm doing a lot of spot retouching basically. So I'm sampling areas around the book to clean it up, because beforehand it was pretty messy. It was just a book that I painted with some acrylic paints, and I went in there and just cleaned it up. You can actually see it again. Yeah, so as you can see, and I did some around here as well of his shirt, I believe. Yeah, just getting rid of little things that you probably wouldn't notice online, but a lot of these images end up being printed large for my limited edition prints and such, so I don't want any of these. A button's not a big deal, honestly, but for me, any kind of distracting thing, it just, like this especially, I find particularly distracting because it's just a little piece of information right in the middle of his shirt, and because of the highlights, it stands out a lot, so better to get rid of that. So from there, we're just continuing. This is darkening book. Oh yeah, I'm just darkening the book here. I try to label my layers as well. I'm pretty bad sometimes, but I once in a while I will, just because there's so many of them that if you don't actually know what each layer is doing, it can get a bit tedious. And you can look at the mask and just see like where is being affected if you control clicked, or if you shift click, I believe. No, I forget what the other shortcut is. Oh yeah, alt click, excuse me. Alt click on a PC. But so that's basically just darkening the book there. And I'm darkening the smoke some more. And instead of just using a curves layer again, I'm actually taking information from another image. So I'm applying information that isn't actually there with another image, instead of just basically slapping a curves layer on top and darkening. And everything works in Photoshop. There are better ways to do certain things. It's just how I like to work. And so as this group would suggest, this is the base. I'm just going to turn that smoke back on. This is adding a little bit of a tuft there that I like instead of it instead of it cutting off there awkwardly. And then from there, it's just the final stage, as this suggests. Oh, I'm gonna turn these on. All right, cool. So this is what the final edit looks like, but we're gonna turn all these off again so you can see what each one's doing. So from here, I'm adding a bit more smoke again. Just more details. And a lot of this is just taste. There is no right or wrong way to do this kind of thing. These were just decisions I made at the time. Even now, I'm kind of looking at this and there's certain things that I would change, but also, see, so this is obviously darkening a lot of the smoke. As you can see, just a curves layer. It's lowering the contrast a bit, or lowering the darks rather, and then limiting the selection to, what was it? Alt, there you go. Limiting the selection to the smoke areas where there are darker values. And here, just continuing the smoke to the top of the frame, as you can see. Just gonna drag this over. This is lagging my computer a little bit because it is a pretty large file and I'm zooming in and out quite quickly. All right, so cool. Then again, just probably some darkening. Yep, just touching up, trying to make this a bit uniform. Smoke, one thing about this kind of an image in particular is that smoke is not uniform. There are kind of brighter spots that naturally occur and darker spots that naturally occur, but at the same time, you don't want too many things kind of standing out. So for this, for example, I noticed right away how that this is a lot brighter, and that's just because my mask here is a bit sloppy. So often you're kind of correcting yourself as you go, and I personally think it's better to work in steps instead of trying to get instead of trying to use one adjustment layer to do everything. I personally like to use a lot of layers and kind of go in there kind of surgically for each step. So again, just it even says darken smoke again. So I'm darkening the smoke. This is everywhere. This is brightening. Okay, see, this is a bit surprising. Sometimes you you find stuff like this in old documents, like, why am I doing that? Okay, so these two are basically, okay, no, there is a difference. It's basically bringing up the darks. It's adding a lot of contrast, adding a bit of punch to it, and brightening the hand especially. You notice that his hands were pretty dark before. Warm skin tones. I think, yeah, I remember thinking his skin looked particularly colorless. So I punched up a bit of the reds, I want to say. Yeah, reds are punched up a little bit and brought the blue slider down a bit, which increases the yellow. This adds a bit more color. Darken skin. Similarly, just darkening a little bit. This is all just very kind of detail oriented. There's no specifics that need to happen here for any kind of other image. This looks like I'm just lowering the highs a bit. Can't quite tell what's going on here. Doesn't look like it's doing much, but there's a mask on the hands. Yeah, it's darkening a bit. All right. And then desaturate everything but hands, I imagine that says, because as I mentioned before, there's a bit of a color cast in the smoke, and I got rid of it in the raw, but I'm pretty paranoid, especially when it comes to printing. I really just like when like blacks in images are actually supposed to be, or actually there's no tints, rather, like what I want to be a black doesn't have a blue or a green or a purple in it. So this is just me kind of making a precaution. Yeah, so it's desaturated minus 100. And obviously I wanted to keep the color in his hands, so the selection I imagine is pretty tightly around the hands. Yeah. And the tips of the book. I wanted a bit of that yellow from the pages to remain. I didn't want it to be too kind of clerical and white. Clean up, just a few little things standing out. So as you can see here, just a bit more darkening in certain spots. And at this point, I'm not actually taking information from the other files like before. I'm just using some clone stamping and just bringing it around, and most likely doing it at very low opacities. As you can see, you can still actually see the checkers from Photoshop, so that's how you know it's not like a solid color or anything. And yeah, just cleaning up the smoke a bit more. And I'm sure there's even things I can notice now that I'd want to do, but honestly, I think it's fine. Once something is done, I like to keep it done, unless if there's like a glaring mistake that I didn't notice while I was editing. And then the last step is just a bit more of darkening of almost everything, I want to say. Yeah, just the blacks in general. The smoke at the top, because I didn't want this smoke to have no detail, but I also didn't want it to be too gray. Kind of the balance to strike, especially with printing, because I notice when you print images, blacks will definitely be darker. And the top here, whenever I'm editing, I always have kind of like a brightness check, just to kind of see, especially when there's a lot of darks in images, especially just to kind of see what's going on in the shadows that you might not notice. So a lot of the cloning and stamping I'm doing, it looks good from a certain perspective, but maybe if you're editing and it's dark the entire time, you won't really notice. So it's always good to kind of change the environment that you're editing in, even if that means changing the lighting in your room, or even just using a white, for example. If you edit on white versus on black, kind of right click, and you can set this up to be any color you want. My custom is always white and black is already there, so I just use black and white. Once in a while I use medium gray just to check for color balance and everything, but usually it's white or black. So I didn't want this to be too white, for example. I wanted there to be some information in terms of color, or a value rather, not just pure white. So when you do print, there is something going on there. It's not just an empty space with no ink. And that's basically the edit, guys. So as I said, pretty straightforward. A lot of time they go in kind of choosing the images and the masks and everything like that. So definitely pretty time consuming, but all of the steps and techniques that go into this are pretty straightforward, and they're things that you could definitely take and use in your own images as well. So that's the image, guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this. I'm going to be doing a bit more content like this in the future where I actually go over my images in Photoshop and actually talking to the camera and showing you who I am. I'm sure a lot of people who know of my work don't actually know who I actually am and like what I look like, what I sound like. So this is just my attempt to kind of be a bit more personable to people who know my work, and also hopefully you'll learn something from this. If you'd like to check out more of my work, you can find a link to my portfolio, my socials, and my web shop where you can buy my prints in the description. Also be sure to subscribe to this channel as well, because I will be releasing more content along these lines. I want to basically just give out more content like this and show people what goes into an image, how I make the image, go through the actual Photoshop documents, and it's probably going to be a monthly basis thing. So if you like this, there's more to come. All that said, take care and hope you have a great day.